Hello everyone, we are Team 3. Our project is Manufacturing the Green. This presentation is authored by myself, Nameera Fatima, Mike StJohn, and Alex Track. The agenda of the presentation is to go through the project overall. We will discuss the introduction and scope, organizational structure of Manufacturing the Green, executive summary, stakeholder analysis, communication and register, schedule and work breakdown structure, cost and estimation at completion, which would discuss about the project budget, risk registers, identifying the risk, and conclusion recommendations and references. The slide gives a basic introduction of the project. Green Automotive organization headquartered in Seoul, South Korea. The organization is based just on one single chassis structure, and they customize their cars based on the target market. Something very similar to Tesla, I would say. So the organization has a new policy where they plan to be 90% sustainable by 2020, and they would use all the recycled material in their manufacturing process. The organization plans to have something which would run 50 kilometers per liter by 2020. That's what Manufacturing the Green is about. The organization maintains high ethical standards and is moving to new locations to boost revenues and to give jobs to people in developing countries. The new model they are working on is called the Green, and that will be something designed in Korea and assembled and sold in Brazil. The scope of the project is to develop an overall project plan that identifies the operational needs of the facility. This is discussed in the stakeholder analysis, schedule and the work breakdown structure report, the case project budget, that is a budget report, and the risk register. The project should also include tasks for making legal agreements with each of the service providers and their value chains. This is in order to make sure that the policies are understood and implemented fully, and also to make sure that the service providers have required technology to meet the project requirements. The project plan should make sure that the facility design is compatible with the construction site. The value chain understands the concept of just-in-time delivery, and all service providers should be ISO certified to comply with the organization's policies. This slide shows the organization structure of the Green Automotive organization. So the main assembly is done within the organization, but the organization interfaces with a lot of service providers to get their different parts to assemble the vehicle. So the tires are done in Colombia, the body is done in Chile, the mechanical service provider is in Brazil, and the whole product is finished in Argentina. So each service provider also interfaces with different value chains located in different countries. So the key point here is to have a good schedule and everyone be in sync to meet the project requirements. Here is the quick executive summary of the project. The budget for manufacturing is set to 20 billion won, which is a Korean currency, converted into US currency approximately to $18 million, based on the exchange rate. $1 equal to 1,080.3 Korean won, and the schedule should be set to complete within 400 days. So the project plan should be set such that it is completed in the budget of $18 million and should be completed within 400 days.
Hello everyone, this is Mike StJohn. Our next topic is the stakeholder analysis. The main objective of this stakeholder analysis was to identify and analyze stakeholders by their relative power and influence in ensuring the successful completion of the project. The PMBOK Guide 4th edition states that the stakeholder analysis is a technique of systematically gathering and analyzing quantitative and qualitative information to determine, and this is the key part, whose interests should be taken into account throughout the project. It identifies the interests, expectations, and influence of the stakeholders and relates them to the purpose of the project. It also helps to identify stakeholder relationships that can be leveraged to build coalitions and potential partnerships to enhance the project's chance of success. The chart to the right is used to visually map out where stakeholders lie. As you can see, you have four quadrants that go by power and influence from low to high. Anyone in the high to high power, high influence is up in the fourth quadrant where it says manage closely. These are those folks, basically CEOs, project managers of the important organizations and all, where if they have an issue, you need to drop everything you're doing and go respond to that. Total opposite, though, is the low, which is just if they have an issue, you can almost put them off and stiff arm them for a short period of time, but minimum effort. You don't need to do anything specific to answer the question. Just make sure you do get back to them. Prior to initiating the analysis, a list of stakeholders was identified and evaluated to determine where they stood in relation to power, or their level of authority, and influence, or their active involvement over the success of the project. With the large number of entities involved in this project, 13 of them, this was a vital step in determining the key players who might need to be managed closely. Key stakeholders include anyone in a decision-making or management role who is impacted by the project outcome, such as the sponsor, the project manager, and the primary customer. For this project, our key stakeholders were identified as the project manager for all organizations, the CEO of the customer assembly, and the sponsor of the customer assembly. Others, as we move down the list, were identified by their relative power, but these were more organization-based rather than person-based. For that process, we selected the customer assembly, the service provider, C, mechanical, and then their two value chain suppliers. Doing this helps anyone in our team understand who they should drop everything for and who they can stiff arm. All right, next we have the schedule and the work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure, or WBS, is defined as a detailed list of activities required for the complete project, regardless of the performing organization. The process of building this list helps an organization in multiple ways, but the most critical area comes in the analysis and definition of project scope. When you consider that scope ambiguity is one of the largest causes of project failure, you can see why the creation and ongoing analysis of this list can help minimize the problems caused by nebulous scope and requirements definitions. The WBS for this project was created with the following assumptions. We were given a 400-day deadline, which we assume is based on calendar days. That's important to note, as the WBS shows a total duration of 261.8 days expressed in work days. The number of calendar days for the project totals 365, resulting in a 35-day buffer to deal with any other unforeseen issues. The customer assembly will purchase the land required to construct a manufacturing facility for their operation, as well as for the manufacturing facilities for all the service providers. Value chain suppliers are not required to be co-located on the campus, so no land will be purchased for them for their operations. And then last, the service providers will be required to abide by the finalized work breakdown structure created by the customer assembly. Okay, the WBS that we've presented shows two distinct schedules, one for the customer and one for all service providers. The service provider schedules are identical at the outset. However, they can be changed as needed to meet the needs of the individual suppliers, so long as the changes stay within the 35-day buffer. So for here, you can see we've got a total number of days, calendar days, at 365 and 261.8 work days, which has been calculated by Microsoft Project. The buffer in calendar days is 35. So you can see below we've got the timelines for the customer assembly, 261, and for the service providers, set at 197.2. Major differences are the customer has to do all the initial purchasing and identification of the land, and then they negotiate, sell the land to the service providers, and then they've got an additional 2-week period at the end where they have to do testing and validation of the manufacturing process. So below that, we've got timelines with milestones for both the customer and for the various service providers.
Our cost and estimate at completion, or EAC, used a conversion between the US dollar and the South Korean won. $1 is equal to 1,129.14 won. So based upon a $20 billion budget in won, converted over to 17,712,477 US dollars. Based upon the chart broken down below, you can see our project came well within that budget, summing up at 13,983,618 US dollars, leaving us with a contingency reserve of a little over $2 million. This reserve, summing in about 20%, would be used for any unplanned expenses. Continuing on with the EAC, we now do a budget breakdown for the project as shown on this slide. The budget is split up among the corresponding service providers for manufacturing and materials, including tires, body, mechanical, and finishes, as well as including the assembly manufacturing capability verification, the system used to make sure that the manufacturing materials and labor were provided for the customer, and the assembly customer themselves based in Magnus, Brazil.
Risk management. It deals with forecasting and evaluation of risk together with identification of procedures to avoid or minimize their impact. So a risk register is used to identify the type of risk. You would see an example in the next slide, but a risk register basically identifies any potential risk that could impact the project's cost, schedule, and performance. The risk register documents the consequences of the event of the risk. It also lists the response of the risk, which can be described as the actions to be taken to minimize the probability and or impact of the risk on the project. The risk can be avoided, accepted, or mitigated based on what type of risk it is and the cost of the response. In other words, we can say that a risk is a documented response to what could occur that would stand in the way of successfully achieving the goals and objectives of my activity or the project. This slide captures a snippet from our risk register. I captured the two most relatively high risk, the first being delay in project phases jeopardizing the ability to meet programmed delivery commitment, and the second is delay in construction due to climatic changes, We decided to mitigate both of these risks by reassigning work resources based on the workload when there are delays in project phases, and we would multitask if there are delays in construction due to climatic changes. So this risk is calculated based on the product of the occurrence of probability and impact, which is done on the scale of 0 being the lowest and 1 being the highest. And we also calculated the response cost, which came up to $10,000 for delay in the project phases and $25,000 for having delays in the project due to climatic changes.
In conclusion, our project management team for Project Green was very successful at implementing the project goals of sustainable manufacturing via the use of 90% recycled materials, as well as reaching the vehicle fuel efficiency of 50 kilometers per liter by the year 2020, while staying within the set budget of 20 billion won. All of this was accomplished using a very detailed WBS to identify key value chain development and legal agreements with value chain suppliers. Our project risk was mitigated due to the strict outline from the risk register, which showed any steps for mitigation of major risk factors this project could endure. Because of all of this, our project also met the requirements for JIT delivery as well as ISO certification.
The recommendations for the green organization is to work on their environmental objectives, show that in the Green's mission statement, highlighting the company's plans for their vehicles to be 90% sustainable, and they plan on using recycled material by 2020. This will really show that they care for the people and planet, build them a good customer base. The second recommendation would be to include objectives to use natural resources as a form of energy. This will contribute to the goal of organization's new policy to be sustainable. The last recommendation would be to choose the value chains wisely, because one of the value chain was in Vietnam, and sometimes there can be social factors leading to delay in the project. So the recommendation here is to choose locally. This slide has the references for this presentation, and the only source we used to do this presentation is our textbook, which is Thomas Gresham's International Project Management. Thank you for going through our presentation. I hope you liked it and learned a little bit about our evaluations. And I've listed our email addresses. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.